Our team at Tomorrow Today has been looking at not just the COVID crisis we're dealing with right now, but at pandemics over the last 100 years, all the way back to the so-called Spanish flu in 1918, 1919. In fact, we've had a major coronavirus pandemic pretty much every decade for the last century. And there's some interesting patterns that emerge as you begin to have a look at what has happened in the last 100 years. For example, every pandemic goes through at least 3 waves where we think we've dealt with it and then things open up and then it hits us again. And I think we're seeing that in many countries now with the COVID crisis. The other thing that we've seen is that some people resist some of the public health measures that are put out in place. We see in past pandemics people complaining about being forced to stay at home, about businesses being shut down, about wearing masks. That's happening again. That for me is one of the saddest things. It's a reminder that, what's that old phrase? The only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. That's a little bit sad. But one of the exciting things that we discover as we look back at past pandemics, in fact, there are 2 related issues. The first is that in almost every pandemic and in almost every country in the past, the recovery has been very, very quick. Obviously, there's a crash and burn, and it's not equally distributed across the economy. Certain industries are hit much harder, like tourism and hospitality and personal services. But when you've dealt with the pandemic, and the faster you deal with the pandemic, the faster the recovery is. And the recovery tends to be very, very quick. In fact, after the Spanish flu, there was a remarkable recovery that led into the roaring 20s. That was a remarkable time of the last century. So remarkable that everybody got a little bit exuberant and it led to a crash at the end of the decade. But that's a different story for another day. The second thing, and maybe the thing I'm most excited about, is that actually times of disaster, times of global crisis, times of deep disruption also tend to be times of great innovation. And that a lot of the innovation bubbles, a lot of the innovation booms that we've seen over the last century have all been related to tough times. And it's during those tough times that entrepreneurs get their game face on, if you like. That people begin to look at some of the deep problems in society and try to find solutions for them. That out of people's frustration, irritation, even anger, comes innovation. And the entrepreneurs and innovators are spurred on by disaster and disruption to put on their innovation, creativity, thinking caps and come up with great new ideas. We always knew the 2020s was going to be a deeply disruptive decade, and we were hoping that it would also be a very innovative one as lots of change came. Digital disruption and sustainability issues and global geopolitics shifts and changes in supply chains and new technologies for manufacturing, and new materials even, new transportation options. There were so many ways in which we have been anticipating the disruptions of the 2020s. And I really do believe that this COVID disruption, yes, is a blip in that, but I think it will actually supercharge and accelerate many of the innovations that we were hoping would be coming. And so the 2020s, this decade that lies ahead of us, I think is going to be one of the most remarkable decades in human history. And I am so excited to see what it brings us. I hope you are too.